of art are going to be your basic parts of an artwork. So no matter what you're doing, if you're making an artwork, you're using the 7 elements of art, which are up here. I've got them on posters. Please, thank you. These seven ideas: line, color, value, texture, shape, form, and space. Those are your 7 elements of art. And you can't have an artwork without using at least one of those. So, like for instance, let's say I am being a particularly clever student, and I turn this in as my artwork because I say it's caught in a blizzard, the artwork. What is one of those elements of art? There's actually more than one of those elements of art at work here. What would be one that you see here? Plain white piece of paper. Let's see. Plain white piece of paper. Color, it's white. Space, it's shallow. It doesn't take up too much space, but it takes up a little bit of space.
Emphasis.
Well, we're not looking at the principles yet, although it is an emphasis on a big white piece of paper. We're just looking at the elements over here.
Form.
Well, if I were to do this and make it 3-dimensional, I have a form, but since it's flat, it's actually going to be a shape of a rectangle. The rectangle is made up of 4.
What about texture?
Oh, texture, because it's smooth.
Yeah.
What do you have to draw 4 of in order to make a rectangle? Lines. Okay, so you've got lines, you've got color. Value is how light or dark a color is. Is it light or dark? It's light, so it's a light value. You've got a smooth texture, you've got a rectangular shape. It could be turned into a form really easily, and you've got that it's taking up some space. So all of the elements are involved in just a plain white piece of paper. And that is kind of proof that like anything you're looking at visually involves those different elements of art. So of course, as an artist, you want to know what those visual elements are that you're working with so that you can put them together in a way that looks really good. So that's why we learn these elements of art. It's like learning your letters before you can spell words. It's like learning your numbers before you can add and subtract. You have to know those basic components before you can go really far. And then once we've reviewed these elements and we remember what those parts are, we're going to figure out how to put the parts together. And that is these principles of design. This is things you can do to put your elements together in a way that looks good. Because as an artist, if I just throw some color on a canvas, it might look good, I might get lucky, but it also might just look like random nonsense. I want to put it together in a way that's visually interesting. So we're going to talk about these principles later, but for today, we're just going to start reviewing what these elements of art are. And what we're going to do is in your sketchbook, I'm going to have you make a visual vocabulary list, which is something we're going to refer to a lot with this next week's project. So that's why, since we have 7 elements and 7 or 8 principles, I don't want to do all of those in one day. So we're going to do the first 3 elements of art, and I'm going to have you write down a quick definition for each, and I'm going to have you draw a definition because it's art. So if you're going to have a definition, you should have an illustration to support your definition. So the first thing we're going to do is set up our visual vocabulary list. So we're going to go to our sketchbook. Everyone take out a pencil and open your sketchbook to the first 2 clean pages of your sketchbook. So you might have to skip over a page, which is fine. And then, because I don't like how floppy these are, sometimes I like to kind of really smooth it out, try to get it a little bit more straight. And what we're going to do is we're going to divide the paper. And the first thing we're going to do is create a title space. So I'm going to draw a line about 1 inch below the top. Doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to draw a line all the way across my 2 pages to start off with. And I'm going to fill that with my title of the category because it's important to remember which ones are elements and which ones are principles for later on down the line. So at the top, I'm going to write all the way across the page the elements of art. Feel free to use any kind of, that looks like a J, any kind of lettering you want if you like to make your pages look really pretty, or just write it because you just need it to be functional. Okay. So the elements category is a little different than the principles of design category. They both mean something a little bit different. So we're going to write a definition for what the elements of art are as like a category. And then we're going to write a definition and draw some illustrations for each one. So we're going to need 8 spaces here. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to draw 1 line, 2 lines, basically 3 lines that go all the way across so that I have 4 spaces on each page to write in. 7 of these are going to be elements, and then the top one is going to be a definition for just the category as a whole. So we're going to start up with that top one.
How much spaces?
I should have 1, 2, 3, 4 on the left and 1, 2, 3, 4 on the right. If they're different sizes, it's okay. It can be flexible. You could even divide if you wanted to divide your space differently and have 8 spaces in a pie shape or in circles. I really don't mind how you make your page look. I'm just doing this the most straightforward way. Because we do need to have a vocab list for elements, not only for next week's project, but actually throughout the semester, we're going to use these terms. So to define the elements, we're going to write down the definition, which I said already, which is the basic parts of art. So in that first space, we're just defining the category elements of art. The basic parts of art. Feel free to decorate that space if you like. I don't have a drawing to put in there. I don't know if this is for everyone. Everyone learns differently. Some people are visual, some people are audio, some people are kinetic. I learn best when I write things and read things. So I find it's a little easier to remember these terms if I've written them down. But I'm trying to do all of the different ways of learning. So we'll not only be talking about them and writing them down, but also next week we're going to be making a series of artworks to really remember what all of these elements are. Okay, so we're going to switch over to my slideshow and take a look at our first one. And just in case you are still filling in, okay, the basic parts of art, that's our definition for the elements of art category. All right, so the first one, line. We're going to write down the definition here. I'm going to talk about it, and then we're going to go back to our, you can be writing, though, while I'm talking.
That's the definition right there.
That's the definition, line. It's the path of a moving point. So any point that is in motion is a line. Like if I draw a line in the air, what I'm doing is I'm pointing my finger and I'm moving my finger, and that creates a line.
Where do I write it?
So in the first, oh, that's a good question. I should probably not flip back and forth too fast. Oops. Sorry, I've lost my mouse. Ever lose your mouse? Okay, so for line, in that first space right here, we're going to write the definition. The path of a moving point. And what you're going to do with the rest of the space is you're going to fill it with as many different types of lines as you possibly can. Because the thing about line is we often underestimate it. Like, we know what a line is. You all use lines in order to create your artwork right now. The psychedelic posters that you are using right now, you use lines to define the letters, to define your spaces. Line is like the first thing we put into any drawing. So that's an easy one to understand. But what we don't always do is we don't always remember how diverse a line could be. So lines can be, right, the definition is still up here if anyone needs it. Lines can be a broken line. Like, a broken line is still a line. You might have a dashed line or a dotted line. Your eye will connect the spaces in between those points to create a line. A line can be wavy, curly, can be thick. Sometimes just by making some of your lines thicker, and some of your lines thinner, you can make your drawing look more interesting. A thicker line feels like it has some weight, and a thin line feels light and fluffy. So by just changing up the type of lines that you put in an artwork, you can make your artwork look more interesting. So for that block, to illustrate lines, there we go. What I want you to do is experiment with how many different lines you can figure out how to draw. Draw some curvy lines, draw some weird lines, draw some dotted lines, dashed and dotted. It's a very small exercise, but sometimes when we give ourselves a few minutes to really explore line quality, try pressing down and seeing how thick and heavy a line you can make, and then try figuring out how thin of a line you can make and see the difference of line quality you see right there. If you have like, let's say if you've ever watched like a cartoon, here's my very advanced stick figure drawing. In order to make this person running, what do you do in a cartoon? Has anyone ever seen this?
Draw a line.
You draw a bunch of swooshy lines like this. Suddenly, he's not standing still anymore. He's running because lines create a sense of movement.
I think it's called motion blur or something.
Motion blur, motion lines.
To make something faster than it may seem. Like without these motion lines, I think some things would look slower than they actually are.
Or just like they're standing still. So include some illustration of lines. Include some drawings that have a bunch of lines in them. Just to kind of play around with the diverse qualities of line. You can do soft lines, you can do hard lines, all sorts of lines. Okay. I think the next one is going to be color. We're going to try to go over color and value real quick and give you a few minutes to fill in some illustrations for each of those, and that's as far as we're going to go today. We're just doing this half of the page, and then tomorrow we'll go over the other half. Okay. So for each one of these, I want you to write the definition I'm giving you, and then draw some illustrations that help you remember what I'm talking about, help you remember some of the pictures on the slides, although the slides will be in your Google Classroom. Okay, so for color, let's go back to the slideshow real quick and take a look at what I have written there for color.
To make something feel alive.
Well, definitely color adds a lot of vibrancy. Color adds a lot of feeling, a lot of motion. It's probably the most powerful of all of the elements.
Yep.
But the definition I want you to write down is what we see when light reflects off a surface. What we see when light reflects off a surface.
Yeah, how does color work?
Well, I'm going to talk about that very briefly.
Like, how do humans perceive what we call color?
So I'm not going to go in depth into the science of color, but you can. The science of color is actually pretty elaborate. In fact, if you were to go to art, to major in art in college, you have to take an entire course dedicated to the study of color. That's how much there is to learn about color. Color is a scientific fact. It's a scientific process that happens, and it's basically sort of a reaction between light and your eyeballs. And you got these rods and cones, and they do all sorts of things, and I am not going to get real deep into it because I probably don't even remember all of the stuff that I've learned about color at this point. But here is the very broad definition of what happens with color. So we know that a beam of light has all the colors in the rainbow, right? That's why when you break up a beam of white light, you see a rainbow. So if there's water droplets in the sky, those water droplets work to break up the light, and then you see all of the different parts of the light individually, which is a rainbow. Or you can use a prism to do that. So we know that all of those colors are basically hidden inside a beam of light, and that beam of light is coming down and hitting a surface. So it's hitting this coffee canister. One of my favorite objects, coffee. So beam of white light coming down and hitting this coffee canister, and whatever chemical makeup this coffee canister is made out of, it is designed to absorb all of the colors in the rainbow except one. It's designed to reject one color and have that bounce off the surface and hit our eyeballs. So this is absorbing green, it's absorbing blue, it's absorbing yellow, but it is reflecting back to us red. So every surface that we look at is made up of something that will absorb most of the colors and reflect some of the color back to us. And that's how we see color. It is much, much more scientific than that. That is the very, very quick version. But basically, when color lands on a surface and bounces back to us, we see parts of that light coming back to us, and the parts of light that come back to us are the colors that we see.
Is it true that there are like actually more colors that we just can't perceive them?
It's possible. I don't know. I have no perception of that.
Like there are certain animals that can't see the same colors as we do.
Yeah, and then there's also people that see color differently, because some people have color blindness. Color blindness has a huge range of like how it affects different people. Some people can see red or differentiate between red and green. So even people see color differently. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to color. We're not going to go further with that. But for your color definition, this is as far as we'll get today, actually. We'll stop after this one. For your color illustration, I want you to remember that relationship that it's between light and a surface. That's really the key point. So usually what I like to do for color is draw a rainbow, or draw, like, I don't know if anyone's a Pink Floyd fan, but Pink Floyd used a sort of beam of light going into a prism or a triangle to turn into a rainbow. So this one's a little harder to just draw a definition because it's so broad. And when we talk about color, we're going to have a whole unit talking about color and the qualities of color. And we will then talk about the emotional connections, because, if you put one color in an artwork, it might feel sad. If you put a different one in, the same artwork might feel happy. And we're going to talk about all of those characteristics of color too. But create some kind of illustration or drawing that helps you remember that that color comes from a beam of light and has to do with what we see of that light on the surface. Okay. So we're going to go through the rest of those terms tomorrow. We'll go through the last 5, and we'll try to go a little bit faster tomorrow too. But as we go through each of these elements, make sure you're drawing something that just kind of helps you remember what that element means. And then next week, after we've gone through all the elements, we will be going through the principles of design. We'll break those up. And that's going to be what we do with the elements, how we use the elements to make things look good. So we have a couple more minutes if you want to finish up a shape or something on your psychedelic posters. Or if you need to call it a day, that's understandable. All right.